The Texas sun burned down on the town square. Dust clung to boots, and the stench of sweat mixed with tobacco smoke. On the wooden stage stood 3 children, their heads covered in rough burlap sacks, small hands tied with frayed rope. The crowd watched in silence, some shaking their heads, others spitting in disgust. The auctioneer, red-faced and sweating, barked out, "3 orphans, sold as a lot. No history, no names. We'll take him." Nobody moved. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men muttered about bad luck. These weren't just orphans, they were a burden. At the back, Martha Hale, a widow wrapped in black, stood stiff as stone. Her husband had died 2 winters ago under a derailed freight train, and since then, she had spoken little. Loneliness clung to her like a second skin. The crowd expected her to turn away like the rest. But when the auctioneer slammed his fist on the podium and shouted, "$3 for all 3. Last call," Martha's hand rose. Gasps rippled through the square. "The widow's gone mad," someone whispered. "She don't even have kin to help her," another hissed. But Martha didn't flinch. Her gray eyes locked on the children. She wasn't sure why she did it, pity, madness, or something darker. The hammer struck. Sold. As the orphans were led off the stage, one of them tilted his head toward Martha. From beneath the burlap sack came a muffled voice. A whisper. One word. Her name. Martha. She froze. Her heart slammed against her chest. How could a child she'd never met know her name? The crowd hadn't heard it. But she had. Clear as a church bell on a winter night. And in that moment, she knew her life would never be the same again. The children were led down from the stage, their small frames staggering beneath the heat. The burlap sacks over their heads made them stumble blindly, their bare feet scraping against the splintered boards of the platform. The crowd parted, some sneering, some crossing themselves as if to ward off bad luck. Martha Hale waited in silence. The coins she had handed over still felt heavy in her palm, as though they carried more weight than their worth. The auctioneer shoved the rope into her hand. "They're yours now, Widow Hale. Don't say I didn't warn you." His eyes flickered, uneasy, as if glad to be rid of the burden. She looked at the children. 3 thin bodies. No words, no cries. Only that single whisper from beneath the sack. "Martha." Her blood still ran cold with the sound. "Come," she said quietly. Her voice cracked, not from command, but from years of silence. The tallest of the 3, orphan bones stretched too thin over skin, took a step toward her. The others followed, their heads bowed beneath the sacks. Behind them, the townsfolk muttered, "Crazy woman. She'll regret this. Nothing good ever comes of orphans like them." Martha ignored it. She walked them toward her cart. The creak of wooden wheels matched the pounding of her heart. She had meant only to take them in, feed them, perhaps ease the silence in her home. But now, she feared she had bought more than mouths to feed. She had bought a secret. As she helped them onto the cart, one of the smaller children hesitated, as if reluctant to touch her. The sack shifted slightly, and though she could not see the child's face, she swore she felt eyes staring at her. Eyes that knew her better than any stranger could. She tightened her grip on the reins, urging the horse forward. The town disappeared behind them, but the whisper lingered in her ears. "Martha." It was not the sound of a child begging. It was the sound of someone who remembered her. And that terrified her more than being alone ever had. The Hale farmhouse stood at the edge of Dust Creek, its roof slouched from years of storms, shutters rattling in the wind. No laughter had echoed within its walls since Martha's husband had been lowered into the earth. Now, as she brought the 3 children through the crooked doorway, the silence seemed heavier than ever. She guided them inside. The floorboards creaked beneath their weight, dust rising from every step. The orphans stood still, heads bowed, sacks still hiding their faces. Martha lit a lantern, the flicker of its flame throwing long shadows against the walls. "Sit," she ordered softly. Her voice was unfamiliar, even to her own ears. She hadn't spoken much in months, and the word felt brittle, like something forgotten. The children obeyed, lowering themselves onto the wooden benches by the table. Their posture was stiff, strange, more like soldiers awaiting command than children seeking shelter. Martha untied the first rope, then pulled away the sack from the smallest child. Beneath it was a boy, maybe 6 years old, with hollowed cheeks and hair matted from dirt. His eyes, though, were sharp, too sharp for a boy his age. He didn't cry, didn't flinch, only stared at her. She hesitated, then removed the sack from the second child, a girl with tangled black hair and pale skin stretched thin over bones. She, too, was silent, her lips pressed together in something that looked like defiance. Finally, Martha's hand reached for the third sack, the tallest one. Her heart thudded as she pulled it free. Another boy, older, perhaps 12. His face bore a faint scar across his cheek. But it wasn't the scar that chilled her. It was his expression. He looked at her as though he had been waiting. Martha stepped back. She expected them to ask for food, for water, for rest. But none spoke. The smallest boy blinked, then leaned forward and whispered again, "Martha." Her name. As if he had always known it. Her throat tightened. "How do you know my name?" The boy said nothing more. The other two exchanged glances, their silence thicker than words. The lantern flickered violently, the flame bowing as if to something unseen. For the first time since she buried her husband, Martha wished the house were empty again. Darkness pressed heavy over Dust Creek. A storm gathered beyond the hills, thunder grumbling like an old drunk in his sleep. Inside the Hale farmhouse, the lanterns had burned down to stubs, leaving only the crackle of the hearth. Martha lay awake in her bed, her hands clenched against the quilt. She could hear them, the orphans. 3 shadows moving in the room down the hall. They made no sound of play, no whispers of comfort to each other. Just footsteps, slow, careful, as though they knew the house better than she did. At last she rose, bare feet brushing the cold wooden floor. She carried a lamp down the hallway, its dim light trembling against the peeling wallpaper. The door to the guest room stood ajar. She pushed it open. The 3 children sat upright on the straw mattress, their eyes reflecting the flame like polished glass. None were asleep, none even blinked. "You should rest," Martha said, her voice tight. "It's a long day tomorrow." The girl tilted her head. The scarred boy never looked away. And the smallest one, the one who had whispered her name, finally parted his lips. "This house knows us," he said, his voice low, too steady for a child. "It remembers." Martha's stomach turned to stone. "What do you mean?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the burlap sack lying crumpled on the floor. He pulled it back over his head. The other 2 followed, covering their faces again in silence. A gust of wind slammed the shutters outside. The lamp flickered, then died, plunging the room into shadow. And in that silence, Martha realized she had not rescued orphans at all. She had invited strangers into her home, strangers who already seemed to belong there. Thunder cracked overhead. Her name echoed again in the dark. Martha. Her knees weakened. For the first time, she wanted to run, but she knew it was already too late. The morning came gray and heavy, the storm clouds still brooding above Dust Creek. Martha sat at the kitchen table, her coffee gone cold. Across from her, the 3 children ate in silence. Their movements were precise, deliberate. They did not look at her, yet she felt their eyes even when their heads were lowered. The youngest boy had kept the burlap sack pulled tight over his head, chewing slowly beneath it. The girl's pale fingers tapped against the table, a rhythm too steady, like a clock counting down. The scarred boy barely touched his food, his gaze fixed on Martha as though waiting for something. She couldn't take it anymore. "Where did you come from?" Her voice cracked against the silence. "Who was your family?" The children paused. The girl lifted her chin slightly, her lips curling into the faintest of smirks. The scarred boy said nothing. Only the smallest one answered, his muffled voice crawling out from under the sack. "You know." Her hands trembled. "No, I don't." "You do." The boy's voice sharpened. "You always did." The words struck her like a blow. She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping the floor. A memory stirred in her chest, something buried deep. Years ago, a night when her husband had returned from the railroad, blood on his clothes, fear in his eyes. He had told her to forget, to never ask where it came from, and she had obeyed. Martha's heart pounded. Could it be? She rose quickly and went to the town records office before her courage failed. The clerk eyed her strangely but fetched the old register books. She traced her fingers along the brittle pages of deaths, births, disappearances. Then she saw it. 3 children, surnames scratched out, declared dead after a fire at the old mill 6 years ago. But the dates didn't make sense. The youngest boy sitting in her kitchen this very morning would have been a baby back then. And yet he had whispered her name with the voice of someone older. She slammed the book shut, bile rising in her throat. If the town believed these children dead, then what, or who, had she brought into her home? The question twisted inside her as she walked back through the dirt road, the farmhouse waiting ahead like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. And as she pushed open the door, she heard it again. From the hall, that whisper. Her name, Martha. This time, it didn't come from a child's throat. It sounded exactly like her dead husband. Martha's breath caught as the voice echoed through the hallway. It was her husband's voice, low, worn by whiskey and railroad smoke. Yet he had been 6 years in the grave. She gripped the doorframe, her knees threatening to buckle. The children stood in the corridor, motionless, their heads slightly tilted as if listening to something she could not hear. The burlap sacks hung loose in their hands now, their faces exposed. The scarred boy's lips curved faintly. The girl's pale eyes glimmered with something between cruelty and sorrow. The smallest one stepped forward. "Papa said your name the same way," he whispered. Her stomach churned. "Papa." Martha shook her head. "You're lying. My husband, he never had children." The scarred boy spoke for the first time, his voice flat, deliberate. "Not children he kept." A chill sliced through her chest. Her mind dragged her back to that night, the night her husband had stumbled home, his shirt stiff with blood. He had claimed it was from a man crushed on the tracks. But the stains had been too high, smeared along his sleeves, his hands shaking. She remembered pressing him for the truth, his jaw tightening as he hissed, "Forget it, Martha. Some things ain't meant for the light." Now, staring at these orphans, no, these remnants, she wondered if she had been living with a monster all along. Why do you know my name?" she whispered, her throat raw. The little boy looked up at her, eyes hollow as a winter grave. "Because he said it before he swung the hammer." Martha staggered back. Hammer. Her husband had been a rail worker, a man with calloused hands and iron tools. A hammer could build the tracks. It could also crush bones. Tears blurred her sight. "No, you're not real. You can't be real." The girl finally spoke, her voice brittle as cracked glass. "We're as real as his sins. And now, Martha Hale, you must carry them." Lightning flashed against the window panes, illuminating their faces. 3 orphans who should have been buried years ago, standing in her home as if they had never left this world. And then, as thunder shook the floor, all 3 whispered in unison, "Martha." The sound hollowed the air, as though her husband's ghost were speaking through their mouths. Martha could no longer sleep. The children's whispers clung to the walls, weaving through the house like smoke from a dying fire. She sat at the kitchen table through the night, clutching her husband's old lantern, her hands trembling against the cold brass. When the first gray light of dawn slipped across the prairie, she knew she could not endure another moment of silence. She needed answers, not from the children, but from the ground itself. She took a spade from the barn and walked to the edge of the property, where the earth sloped down toward the creek. It was a place her husband had often wandered at night, returning with mud on his boots. She had never questioned it before. Now, each step felt like a walk toward judgment. The soil was damp from the storm. She pressed the spade down, the earth giving way with a sucking sound. She dug furiously, her breath ragged, the lantern swinging by her side. Minutes stretched into hours until her blade struck something hard. Her heart lurched. She scraped the dirt away with her bare hands. A shard of bone emerged, pale against the black soil. Then another, a tiny ribcage, and beside it, the remains of a burlap sack. Martha fell back, her chest heaving. Tears blurred her vision. It was true. The children's whispers had not been lies. Her husband had buried his sins in her land. She staggered to her feet, clutching the lantern as though it could shield her from the truth. But as she turned toward the house, she froze. The children were standing at the edge of the field, their faces pale in the weak dawn light. She hadn't heard them approach. The smallest boy still wore his sack, the cloth damp with dew. The scarred boy's eyes fixed on her shovel. The girl's lips curved, almost in triumph. "You found us," the little one said. His voice was calm, almost tender. Martha shook her head violently. "No, I didn't. I didn't know." The scarred boy stepped forward. "But you chose not to ask. That makes you his." The words cut deeper than the shovel's blade ever could. She had been complicit in her silence. For 6 years, she had lived in comfort while these children, forgotten, nameless, had rotted beneath her soil. The lantern's flame flickered. Martha's knees buckled, the spade slipping from her hands. And then, in a voice that was not hers, but eerily like her husband's, the girl whispered, "Burying doesn't mean forgetting. It only means waiting." The earth seemed to close in around her, and for the first time, Martha Hale prayed not for forgiveness, but for escape. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its windows dark as sockets in a skull. Martha stumbled back toward it, mud clinging to her dress, her hands still shaking from the bones she had unearthed. She wanted to slam the door shut, bar the world out, pretend none of it was true. But the children followed, silent, relentless, shadows that could not be shaken. Inside, she threw the lantern down and bolted the door. Her chest heaved as she leaned against it, sweat running cold along her spine. For a moment, silence returned. She almost believed she was alone. Then she heard it, small footsteps padding across her parlor floor. One by one, deliberate, she spun around. The three of them were already inside. She hadn't seen the door move, hadn't heard glass break. But there they were, waiting. The scarred boy sat himself in her dead husband's chair by the hearth. The girl drifted to the table, running her pale fingers along the wood as though she had lived there all her life. The smallest one pulled his sack tighter, then turned his head toward Martha. "You can't leave," he whispered. Her throat tightened. "What do you want from me?" The girl's lips curved. "The truth." Martha shook her head, backing toward the staircase. "I didn't do this. I didn't hurt you." "No," the scarred boy said evenly, "but you let him. And now you wear his silence." The words hollowed her out. Her chest burned as she bolted up the stairs, her skirts tangling in her hands. She pushed into her bedroom and through the lock. Her heart hammered in her ears. She looked to the window. Maybe she could climb down, escape into the night. But when she pulled the curtain aside, her breath froze. 3 small figures stood in the yard, staring up at her window. She staggered back. Impossible. They had been downstairs only seconds ago. A whisper curled against her ear, close as breath. "Martha." She turned. The smallest boy was standing in her room, the sack dripping rainwater though it hadn't rained for hours. Her scream tore through the walls, but Dust Creek was too far, too empty. No one came. And somewhere, she knew, there was no way out. Martha pressed her back against the wall, her lungs clawing for air. The boy in the sack stood inches away, head tilted, the damp cloth clinging to the shape of his face. The room smelled of soil, freshly turned earth, the kind she had dug into only hours before. Her trembling hand reached for the drawer by her bed. She pulled it open, snatched out the revolver her husband had left behind. The steel was cold, heavy, and for a moment it gave her courage. "Stay back," she hissed. The boy did not move. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You think a gun will change what's buried?" The girl and the scarred boy appeared in the doorway, silent sentinels. Their eyes glowed in the dim lantern light. The house felt smaller, walls pressing in, the air thick with memory. "You knew," the girl said, her voice sharp. "You heard the cries when he brought us here." Martha shook her head violently. I told myself it was the wind. I didn't want to believe." The scarred boy stepped forward. "And so you didn't. You let him kill, and you let him bury us in your soil. You chose silence." Tears blurred her sight. Her finger hovered over the trigger, but her strength faltered. She remembered her husband's boots caked in mud, the nights he returned late, the way he smelled of iron and smoke. She had asked once, only once, and his glare had silenced her. She had lived with that silence ever since. The smallest boy lifted the sack from his head. Beneath it was a face too pale, too hollow, and eyes that burned with something ancient. "We don't want your bullets, Martha." "Then what do you want?" Her voice cracked, desperate. The boy smiled faintly. "We want you to remember. And we want you to carry him with you, as he carried us beneath the earth." The revolver slipped from her grip, clattering to the floorboards. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, the sound filling the house like a hymn of guilt. The girl leaned closer, her whisper colder than the storm outside. "Your husband's sins are yours now. And sins don't stay buried." The lantern guttered. The room plunged into shadow. The only thing left was the sound of 3 children breathing in unison. The farmhouse was silent, save for the rasp of Martha's breath. She knelt on the floor, tears soaking her dress, the revolver lying useless at her side. The children circled her slowly, their bare feet whispering against the boards. The scarred boy spoke first, his tone like a judge pronouncing sentence. "He swung the hammer. He buried us here. But you," he paused, eyes narrowing, You let the silence grow roots. The girl bent low, her pale hair brushing Martha's cheek. You slept while we cried. You cooked his meals while our bones rotted beneath your soil. Martha's voice cracked. I was afraid. I didn't know what to do. The smallest boy crouched before her, his burlap sack gone, his eyes hollow as empty graves. He whispered her name again. Martha. She flinched. What do you want from me? His lips curved faintly, almost kind. We want you to join us. Her blood turned to ice. Before she could move, the children reached out, 3 small hands, pale and cold as clay. They touched her wrists, her shoulders, her throat. The air thickened, her chest clamped shut, the world spun. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The lantern's flame died, plunging the room into blackness. When dawn broke over Dust Creek, the Hale farmhouse stood quiet, its shutters swaying gently in the wind. On the parlor floor sat 3 children, sacks tied neatly over their heads once more. And beside them, a 4th figure. Martha Hale, her face hidden beneath rough burlap, her body still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Just another orphan among them. From beneath the sacks came a single word, whispered in unison, their voices blending with hers. Martha.